Now, let's get on to the structure of a response story. And Paul, used this structure in those two recordings, right? So they're very subtle. You don't hear the structure unless you're aware of it, right? And the structure is simply what we would call a clarity story. So if you go to my book and look at putting stories to work, you'll sort of see a description of clarity stories and how they're used for strategies, etc. But they're also beautifully suited for response stories. And I guess the 4 parts is straightforward. You start off by providing some context, right? Some what it was like in the past. And actually, I had a question sent to me before the webinar from Tamara Rule, who's at Allen's, one of the big law firms here in Australia. And she was just sort of saying, how do you build in, the history of organisations? And yeah, part of that is in the past. This is where you give representation to that, and acknowledge, the important things that have happened. Now, you don't want to put too much into it, right? Because, Paul's renditions were like 90 seconds and maybe nearly 2 minutes, right? It's not much time at all, but you can make a much longer story by expanding it, but you don't want to typically do that. So in the past, then something happened, and this is the crux of the story, right? Something changed, COVID-19, but you don't want to just say, oh, and the pandemic hit, because your people need to know more than that. They want to know how it affected your business, right? So the pandemic hit and all our training shrunk. Pandemic hit and we got very busy on delivering parcels. We want to know what happened as a result of COVID-19. Then in the so now space, that's where you talk about the things you're going to do, the decisions that you've made. And that's the least story-like part of the story, right? It's usually sort of a list of dot points. We're going to do this, we're going to do this and that. You can add an anecdote or two in there to liven it up, but generally speaking, you want to make that nice and simple and clear. And then finally, you want to give a sense of what the future is going to be like. And again, you want to include that in a story sort of format. Paul used a technique that we use quite a lot, and that is, so imagine this, imagine this. So that's definitely part of the process. The other technique you can use at the end there is tell an example of something that's already happening that represents your future, right? So you get to the future bit and you sort of say, you know what, and we can imagine that we're going to head in this direction. For example, this is happening now. We're doing a pilot, and then you talk about the thing that's actually happening now. The great thing about that is that people don't have to have a big leap of faith about how the future is going to look. They know, oh, this is what it looks like right here and now. So that's the overarching story, but you'll notice with Paul's example, especially with Story Steve, is that it was populated with few anecdotes, little moments we call them. And this is what brings these things to life, right? This is what makes them human. And also, most importantly, this is what makes them visual. And visual stories are the things that we remember and the things that we feel.